There is a particular kind of power that is built entirely on the willingness of others to participate in it. Not the power of law or of wealth, which exist independent of anyone's willingness, which continue to function regardless of whether the people subject to them consent to the arrangement. The power Seraphina Ashford, Duchess of Veltmore, had accumulated across 4 seasons of London was a different kind entirely. It was the power of attention. Power of desire organized and directed and concentrated until it produced, in the people who felt it, a specific and entirely voluntary form of helplessness. The helplessness of a man who would like very much to stop wanting something and cannot. She had not designed this power. She had simply been born with the materials from which the world, given the opportunity, would build it. The face, the fortune, the particular quality of presence that fills a room before the person producing it has crossed the threshold. The ton had done the building, with the enthusiastic cooperation of every man who had attended a London season in the past 4 years. And Seraphina had occupied the structure they built with the easy confidence of someone who has never known a room that did not arrange itself around them. She had also, if she was honest with herself, which she was in the privacy of her own mind, more often than the performance of her public life required, been bored by it for at least 2 of those 4 years. The adoration was real. She did not doubt the adoration. But adoration directed at a surface, however beautiful the surface, eventually produces in the person behind the surface the specific, low-grade suffocation of someone who is very thoroughly seen and not at all known. She had been waiting, without quite knowing she was waiting, for someone to look at her differently. Lord Benedict Ashfield, Earl of Renmore, looked at her hardly at all. This was not the studied indifference of a man performing unavailability. She knew that performance had encountered it several times from men who believed that a strategic retreat would make them interesting, and had found it transparent and slightly tedious. This was something else. This was the indifference of a man who was genuinely occupied with other things, and who found, upon surveying the room, that the Duchess of Veltmore was simply not among the things that required his attention. Before we get to the garden maze, before we follow Seraphina into the moonlit hedgerows of the Carlton House masquerade, before we watch her remove her mask and demand an answer, I need to ask you something. Have you ever met someone whose indifference to you was more interesting than anyone else's interest? Have you ever found that being unremarkable to a particular person felt, inexplicably, like the most remarkable thing that person could have done? Drop your answer in the comments, because Seraphina had received the devotion of half of England and found it pleasant and predictable. And then Lord Benedict Ashfield offered her a perfectly correct nod and returned to his conversation, and she thought about it for 3 days. Subscribe and hit the bell. Tell me where you are watching from tonight, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room now. Let's begin. The Sovereign of London. She moved through London ballrooms the way weather moves through a landscape, not by force, but by presence, by the specific quality of being a fact that the room had to organize itself around. This was not vanity exactly. Vanity would have required her to find it interesting, and she had stopped finding it interesting sometime in the middle of her 2nd season, when the pattern of a London ballroom had become sufficiently legible that she could predict within the first half hour of any evening which lords would approach, in what order, with what opening remarks, and with what underlying calculation visible beneath the surface charm. The Marquess, who was cultivating her for her estate connections. The young Viscount, who was genuinely smitten and would be briefly devastating to refuse. The older Duke, who had decided, with the serene confidence of a man who has been important for a long time, that she would eventually recognize the merit of his interest. She received them all with the specific warmth of a woman who has learned that warmth costs her nothing and produces goodwill, which was a form of social currency she had found consistently useful. She danced when she chose to dance. She declined when she chose to decline. She moved through the season with the composed authority of someone who understood that the room was not her opponent and not her audience, but simply her environment, and that moving through an environment well was a matter of knowing it thoroughly. She knew the London ballroom environment as thoroughly as any person alive, which was why the exception was so immediately and thoroughly disorienting. She had noticed Benedict Ashfield first at the Cavendish Winter Assembly, which was the opening event of the third season, the first occasion on which the ton reassembled after the autumn dispersal and re-established, in the first hours of its reunion, the social calculus it would operate by for the next several months. He was near the window, not positioned near the window in the way that men position themselves near windows at social events, the specific calculated positioning of men who wish to appear absorbed in thought while remaining visible, but actually near the window in the specific way of someone who had drifted there in the course of a conversation and had not moved because the conversation was what mattered, and the window was simply where the conversation happened to be. She had looked at him as she looked at most people in a new room, with the quick, comprehensive assessment of a woman who has learned to read a social landscape rapidly and accurately. She had noted his face, which was interesting in the specific way of faces that have been lived in rather than maintained. His bearing was the bearing of a man who is comfortable with authority rather than performing it, and his expression, which was the expression of a man in the middle of a genuine intellectual engagement rather than the social performance of intellectual engagement. He had not looked back. This was not unusual. Many people did not notice her immediately. The room was full, the assembly was crowded. Not everyone was tracking her movements. What was unusual was that he did not look back later either. She had moved through the room. She had passed near the window twice. She had been introduced by the mutual acquaintance of Lord Pemberton, and had received the introduction with the warm, engaged attention she gave introductions, and Benedict Ashfield had received her in return with a courtesy that was correct in every particular and entirely without the specific quality she was accustomed to receiving from men to whom she was introduced, which was the quality of a person understanding that they are being given something valuable and adjusting accordingly. He had offered her a nod. He had said the appropriate things. He had returned his attention to Lord Pemberton. She had stood for a moment in the slight, novel experience of being the person whose departure from a conversation went unnoticed, and had then moved on, and had thought about it later, and had told herself it did not particularly matter, and had continued to think about it for 3 more days. By the second month of the season, she had developed a theory. The theory was that Benedict Ashfield was conducting a strategy, that his indifference was the calculated performance of a man who had identified that indifference was the one response she had not encountered, and who was using it as an approach. It was, she had to admit, not an unintelligent strategy. It had produced in her considerably more interest than sonnets would have. She tested the theory. She engineered 3 separate occasions on which they found themselves in the same social grouping, and watched him closely for the specific signs of a man managing a performance, the small adjustments of expression, the awareness of her position in the room, the particular quality of attention that a performance requires, even when the performance is indifference. She found none of them. He was not indifferent to her as a strategy. He was indifferent to her as a condition. He was a man who moved through rooms with genuine purposes. Conversations about parliamentary matters, legal discussions, the exchange information with people whose information was relevant to him, and who found, upon surveying the room, that the Duchess of Veltmore was simply not among the things that required his attention. She revised her theory. The revision produced a new question, which was considerably more uncomfortable than the original one. If it was not strategy, then what was it? What was this man? This specific, particular man doing when he looked at her and saw nothing that warranted further looking, when every other man in 4 seasons of London had looked and found something that required considerably more looking? She did not have an answer. She found, to her significant irritation, that the not-having of the answer had become the dominant fact of her social life. The direct confrontation, the Carlton House masquerade, was the event of the season. the one occasion on which the social world of London put on masks and pretended, for an evening, that identity was optional, that the hierarchies which organized every other evening were temporarily suspended, that a duchess could be anyone and anyone could be a duchess. The pretense was, of course, entirely transparent. Everyone knew who everyone was. The masks simply gave people permission to behave as though they did not, which produced a specific quality of freedom that was not real freedom, but was more than the ordinary evening provided. Serafina wore a mask of deep gold that matched nothing about her face specifically and everything about her face generally, which was the specific achievement of a woman who understands that the mask is an extension of the costume, and the costume is an extension of the self, and all of it requires as much thought as the face beneath it. She found Benedict in the royal gardens. Not by accident, she had tracked his movement from the ballroom to the terrace to the garden entrance with the patient, specific attention of a woman who has decided that the evening is going to produce the answer to a question she has been carrying for 2 months, and who has organized her movements accordingly. The maze was her opportunity. She knew the Carlton House garden maze, as she knew most things she had encountered more than twice, thoroughly. She entered from the east, moved through 3 turnings, and arrived at the center junction ahead of him, positioned at the single point where the paths converged, which was the single point from which departure required passing through her. He came around the corner and stopped. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued and analyzed across 2 months of social occasions. The expression of a man who has encountered something and is assessing it with the clear, unloaded attention of someone who has not yet decided what the something is. She removed her mask. The removing was deliberate, not theatrical, not performed for an audience of one, but deliberate in the way of a woman who has decided that the conversation she is about to have deserves to be had face to face, without the pretense of anonymity that the evening provided, and who is offering the abandonment of the pretense as a signal of the conversation's seriousness. She looked at him. "Lord Benedict," she said. Her voice had the quality she used when she was being most direct, not the warm social voice, not the amused, lightly ironic voice of a woman receiving the attentions of an admirer, but the clear voice of a person asking a question they actually want answered. "Every man in this kingdom would trade his title for a moment of my time. Yet you look through me as if I were a pane of glass. I demand to know why. What is wrong with me?" The garden held its moonlit silence. Benedict looked at her for a long moment, not with the specific, assessing quality of a man deciding how to respond, but with the quality of a man who has already decided and is simply giving the deciding its appropriate weight before he speaks. He took 1 step forward. "There is nothing wrong with you, Your Grace," he said. His voice was the voice of a man who says what he means without performance and without apology. Not unkind, not cruel, but without the specific cushioning of social language that most people applied to true things before delivering them. "You are flawless, but I have no desire to be another notch on your scepter, or a backup singer in the chorus of your worshippers. I do not play games where the prize is a woman who loves her own reflection more than the man holding her." The words arrived with the specific quality of true things delivered without management, without the softening that would have made them easier to receive and less accurate in the receiving. She had asked for an honest answer, and he had given her one, and the giving had the quality of a man who had not been asked for the answer before, and who had, apparently, had it ready for some time. She stood in the moonlight and she felt the words land, not with pain, not immediately, with the specific, slightly disorienting quality of impact that occurs when something true makes contact. She had been told she was beautiful many times, in many formulations, with many degrees of eloquence. She had never been told by anyone what she actually was, not the beauty, not the title, not the social position, but the specific quality of how she had organized herself around those things, and what that organizing had produced, and what it looked like from outside. He did not hate her beauty. He found her vanity, the specific, comfortable vanity of a woman who had allowed the world's adoration to become her primary relationship with herself. entirely uninteresting as a basis for engagement. She watched him step around her, politely, and walk back toward the ballroom. She stood in the center of the maze for a very long time. Changing the rules, she went home and looked at herself in the mirror. Not the mirror of her vanity table, which was the mirror she used for the specific purpose of organizing her appearance for public occasions. The other kind, the internal mirror, the one that operates without a reflective surface, that shows you not the face you are presenting to the world, but the face of what you are actually doing and why. She looked, and she found Benedict's words accurate. Not entirely. She was not, she decided, a woman who loved her own reflection more than the man holding her. She was a woman who had been given no opportunity to find out, because the men who had held her had been holding the reflection, and the reflection had been the thing between her and the actual answer. She had been inside the hall of mirrors for so long that she had stopped distinguishing between the reflections and the thing being reflected. Benedict had not held the reflection. He had declined to hold anything, and in the declining, he had done the thing that 4 years of adoration had not done, which was to make her wonder what she was when the adoration was removed. What was left when the crown was set aside? What she contained that was worth the containing without the audience to tell her it was worth it? She spent 3 days answering this question. The answer was surprising in its specificity. She was, she discovered, deeply interested in political theory, had been interested, quietly and without outlet, since her father had read parliamentary debates to her as a girl, and she had found even then that the arguments contained problems she wanted to engage with. She had read extensively in the past 4 years, in the private hours of her mornings before the social obligations began, because reading was the one activity she had found that reliably produced in her the feeling of being genuinely inside something, rather than performing a relationship to it. She had never told anyone about the reading. The reading was not the kind of thing that produced the responses she was accustomed to receiving. It was not beautiful. It did not add to the performance. It was simply the thing she did when she was most completely herself, and most completely herself was not the version of herself that the ton had decided it wanted. She looked at Benedict's parliamentary record. She found it, on examination, brilliant in some respects and wrong in several others. And the wrongness was the kind of wrongness that came from a position she could see the merit of and disagreed with for specific, articulable reasons that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with the substance of the argument. She wrote him an anonymous letter. The letter was 3 pages. It addressed the specific weaknesses of his position on the agricultural reform bill with the precision of someone who had read the bill, read the relevant precedents, read the counter-arguments in the parliamentary record, and had an opinion that was grounded in all of it, and that was worth the reading of. She delivered it through the parliamentary correspondence system, anonymously, signed only with an initial she had selected specifically because it was not her own. She did not attend any event where he might be present for 2 weeks. Not from strategy. From the specific self-consciousness of a person who has done something genuine and is not yet ready to be in the same room as the person it was done for. Because genuine things require a different kind of composure than performed things, and she was still organizing herself around the genuine. She attended the parliamentary gallery. She sat in the upper gallery of the House of Lords with the other women who attended debates, dressed in the least conspicuous thing her wardrobe contained, which was still conspicuous by ordinary standards, but was considerably less so than her usual presentation. And she listened. She listened to Benedict argue his position on a bill about land rights with the specific clean attention of a woman for whom the argument was interesting in it itself, not as an occasion to observe the man making it. She sent a second letter, then a third. Benedict began to look for the letters. This was not, initially, something he acknowledged to himself directly. He told himself he was interested in the argument which was true. The arguments were the best counter-arguments to his positions that he had encountered in 2 parliamentary sessions, written by someone who understood the material at a level that most of his colleagues did not, and who had opinions about it that were grounded in actual engagement with the substance, rather than the political calculation. He was interested in the argument. He was also interested in the person making it. The letters had a quality that he had only encountered in a small number of his correspondence across a career in Parliament. The quality of a mind that thought in complete paragraphs, that had organized its position before it began writing rather than discovering its position in the writing, that was willing to be wrong about a specific point while holding its larger argument, which was the quality of someone who valued accuracy over the performance of consistency. He made inquiries about the initial. He received nothing useful. He noticed that Duchess Veltmore had begun attending parliamentary debates. He filed this observation in the part of his mind reserved for things that required further attention and returned to his work. The far more beautiful reason, the evening she came to his townhouse, was a Tuesday in November, 6 months after the garden maze. The legal text she was delivering was genuine. She had found it in her father's library, a privately printed treatise on land rights that contained a specific argument relevant to the bill. Benedict was currently managing through committee, and she had thought, with the specific practicality of a woman who has stopped performing her motives and is simply acting on them, that delivering it was the efficient thing to do, and that efficiency was a sufficient reason. She had also thought about it for 3 days before delivering it, which was not the behavior of someone acting purely on efficiency, but which she chose not to examine too closely. His housekeeper showed her to the study. Benedict was attending to something in the adjacent room and would return in a moment. She was offered tea and accepted it, and found herself alone in the study with the specific quality of attention she brought to rooms she was in alone, the full, unmanaged attention of a person who is not organizing herself for an audience and is therefore free to look at things directly. She looked at his room. The room had the quality she had come to associate across 6 months of parliamentary observation and anonymous correspondence with Benedict's particular kind of intelligence, organized around function rather than presentation, dense, with the specific evidence of a person who used his books rather than displayed them, with annotations visible from where she stood and multiple volumes open simultaneously on the desk in the specific arrangement of someone in the middle of a sustained intellectual process rather than at the beginning or end of one. She looked at the desk. On the corner, separate from the parliamentary documents and the open volumes, was a folder, older than the other materials on the desk, worn at the edges, the leather soft with handling, the kind of folder that has been taken out and put away many times across a long period. She looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then she opened it. The drawings were not of the Duchess of Veltmore. This was the first thing she understood, and she understood it before she had fully processed what she was looking at, because the person in the drawings did not have the Duchess of Veltmore's face in the way the Duchess of Veltmore's face was usually rendered. The composed public occasion face, the face of a woman who knows she is being looked at and has organized herself accordingly. The person in the drawings had her face without the organizing. There was one of her in the parliamentary gallery, her head slightly angled, her expression the expression she wore when an argument was interesting, which was a private expression, an interior expression, the specific look of a person who is genuinely inside a problem and has forgotten that being inside a problem in public might be visible. She had not known anyone could see that expression from the gallery floor. She had believed she was invisible in the gallery. There was one of her in a carriage window. Not posed, not performing presence, but looking out with the specific, unfocused quality of a person thinking, the kind of thinking that has no particular object but is simply the mind working through something, while the eyes point at the passing city without seeing it. There was one of her with a book, not the public occasion of being seen with a book, but reading, actually reading, with her posture completely uncurated and her attention entirely on the page, and her face doing the thing it did when she was most absorbed, which was simplify, which was lose the specific complexity that public occasion faces carry and become just a person in a room with something that interested them. She turned the pages. There were sketches across the full 6 months. Beginning, she saw from the positions and occasions she recognized. Before the garden maze, before she had begun attending Parliament, before the letters. Beginning, she realized as she traced the dates backward at approximately the time of the Winter Assembly, where she had been introduced to him, and he had offered her a correct nod and returned to his conversation. She was still holding the folder when the door opened. He stopped in the doorway. He had a tea tray. He set it down on the table near the door with the careful, composed efficiency of a man doing something mechanical while his mind is occupied with something else entirely, which was looking at the woman standing at his desk, holding the thing that had been in the locked drawer that was apparently no longer locked, or was locked, and she had found the mechanism, both of which were consistent with what he had come to understand. Across 6 months of anonymous letters, about her particular quality of thoroughness. "Seraphina," he said, "not your grace, not Lady Veltmore." Her name, which he used in the way that people use names when the name is the accurate form of address, because titles have ceased to be the relevant variable. She looked up at him. Her face had the quality he had been drawing for 6 months. Not managed, not organized for his reception of it, simply her, looking at him with the full, clear, unarmored attention of a woman who has just read something true about herself and is deciding what to do with the reading. He moved into the room and sat down, which was not the response of a man who had walked in and found his private things in someone else's hands and was managing his reaction. It was the response of a man who had walked in and found the conversation he had been not having for 6 months sitting, fully assembled, in his study, and who had decided that not having it any longer was the correct move. "You asked me why I never wanted you," he said. His voice was the voice underneath the parliamentary voice. The voice that existed when the argument was not about policy, but about something that mattered more than policy. "In the garden, you asked what was wrong with you." "I remember," she said. "The truth is," he said, "I wanted you too much to afford it." He looked at the folder in her hands. "I fell in love with your mind before I understood what I was looking at, before you became the most wanted woman in London, before the reputation settled into its permanent form. I saw you at a debate your father attended when you were 19. You were in the gallery, and you were listening to a committee argument about land rights, with an expression that told me you had read the relevant precedents and had opinions about them. You did not know I was watching. You were simply in the argument, without any awareness that being in an argument in public required management." He stopped. "I did not introduce myself then. By the time we were formally introduced, you had become what you are, which is considerable and beautiful and exactly the kind of woman that men approach with exactly the wrong kind of attention. And I knew that if I was another man in the crowd of men approaching with the wrong kind of attention, I would become to you what all of them were to you, which was another person wanting the surface and missing the thing underneath it." He looked at her directly. "I had to stay away," he said, "to keep myself from becoming indistinguishable from the chorus. To stay the one person who was not asking for what everyone else was asking for, because being the one person who was not asking was the only position from which you might eventually understand that I was seeing something the others were not." The fire in the grate was doing what fires do in November studies, burning steadily without drama, producing heat that arrived at the person sitting near it in the specific, accumulated way of real warmth rather than performed warmth. Seraphina held the folder and looked at him and thought about 6 months of parliamentary galleries and anonymous letters, and the particular quality of engagement that had been developing in the space cleared by her abandonment of the performance between a mind she had been corresponding with and a man she had been trying to understand. She thought about the drawings. Not the beautiful ones. There were no beautiful ones in the sense of drawings that captured the beauty that Ton had organized itself around. There were only the true ones. The gallery expression and the carriage window and the face over a book. The drawings of a woman being herself in rooms she believed she was alone in, rendered by someone who had been watching her be herself with the patient, specific attention of a man who had decided that the self was the thing worth watching. "The letters," she said. Not a question. He looked at the folder. "I suspected by the third one. I was certain by the fifth. And you said nothing. You were not ready for me to say something," he said. "You were still finding out whether the mind was yours, or whether it had always been yours. And you had simply not been given occasion to know it. I was not going to name you before you had named yourself." Serafina set the folder down on the desk, carefully, in the specific way of someone returning something valuable to its place, rather than putting something down. She looked at him across the study, across the open volumes and the parliamentary papers, and the tea tray by the door, and the fire doing its steady, undramatic work, and she felt the specific quality of being seen. Not the seeing of the ton, which was the seeing of a surface understood to be beautiful and desirable. The seeing of a person who had looked at her in the parliamentary gallery at 19, with an expression that meant he had found the thing underneath, and had been waiting, with considerable discipline and considerable cost, for her to find it too. "I have been writing to you for 6 months, she said, "and you have been writing back, and neither of us has said anything that is not entirely true, and it is the most honest correspondence I have conducted in my adult life." He said nothing. He was looking at her with the expression she had never seen from him in public. The expression that was not the cool, composed, parliamentary face, but the face of a man who is not managing anything at all. "You might have told me earlier," she said. "You might have been less magnificent," he said. "Then I would have had less reason to be careful." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him, reached for the tea he had brought, and said, "The argument in your third letter about property rights succession was wrong. I wrote you 4 paragraphs on why, and you did not respond to the 4th paragraph, which was the one with the actual counter-argument." His expression shifted, the specific shift of a man encountering a problem he wants to engage with. "The 4th paragraph," he said, "was wrong in its reading of the 1792 precedent." "It was not. It was. Would you like to show me?" He reached for the relevant volume. She moved her chair to see the page. They were in the argument before either of them had noticed they had entered it. In the specific, immediate way of 2 people for whom intellectual engagement is the most natural form of being together, which was a form neither of them had found with another person before this one, the only man who matters. The final ball of the London season was the occasion the ton organized everything around, the closing statement of the social year, the event at which final alliances were confirmed and final assessments were delivered, and the assembled world of London made its last determination before dispersing to the country. Serafina had been the central subject of the season's final determination for 4 consecutive years. The question was always the same. Which of the eligible men would she honor with her selection? The field was usually presented with the specific, theatrical organization of something the room wanted to watch: the princes, the dukes, the marquises, arranged in their various degrees of eligibility and hopefulness, each representing a different calculation about what the Duchess of Veltmore's selection would mean for the season's social arithmetic. This year, the field was the most impressive assembled. 2 foreign princes, 1 hereditary duke, 3 marquises of varying but substantial consequence. The betting at the gentlemen's clubs had been running for 2 months, with the hereditary duke currently favoured, though the first foreign prince had his advocates. She arrived. The room did what rooms did when she arrived, the specific ambient reorganization of attention that her presence produced, as reliable as weather, as automatic as the tide. She moved through the receiving line with the warmth and composure of a woman who had been doing this for 4 years, and who did it very well. She saw the line of suitors. She saw them with the specific clear eyes of a woman who has spent 6 months in parliamentary galleries, and in an honest correspondence and in a study in November, arguing about an 1792 land rights precedent, and who is therefore seeing them from a slightly different position than she occupied at the beginning of the season, which is the position of a woman who has found something real and is therefore in a different relationship to the performance of availability. She walked past them, not quickly. not with the dramatic purposefulness of a woman making a statement. She had never needed drama to make statements, had always found that the clearest statements were the ones that did not announce themselves. She walked with the composed, unhurried quality of a woman who is going somewhere and is not concerned with who notices the going. The room noticed. The ton, which had been watching Strafina Ashford for 4 seasons with the attentiveness of an institution that has identified its primary subject and is committed to comprehensive coverage, that she had walked past the line of suitors and was walking toward the back of the room. And the noticing moved through the crowd with the efficiency of information moving through a space organized around it. Benedict was at the back of the room. He was near the marble pillar, not positioned there in the way of men who arrange themselves at the edge of rooms as a social statement, but in the specific way of a person who has drifted to the least socially intense location in the room because the most socially intense locations are not where he prefers to be, and he is at a ball because parliamentary courtesy requires it, and not because he would have chosen it. He saw her coming. She watched him see her. Watched the expression of a man who has been managing the specific, costly discipline of not looking at someone in public for 6 months receive. In the privacy of a backroom pillar, the approach of that person in full view of the room that had organized itself around the question of where she was going. His expression was not managed. It was simply him. The face she had seen in the study in November. The face that existed when he was not producing the parliamentary Earl of Renmore for an audience. The face of a man who is looking at the thing that matters most to him and has temporarily forgotten to be careful about how the looking appears. She reached him. She offered him her hand. Not her hand in the manner of a woman offering to be escorted. In the manner of a woman offering something she has decided to give to a person she has decided to give it to in front of everyone, because the front of everyone was important, was in fact necessary, was the specific public statement that would end 4 seasons of the Ton's construction of her as a prize to be won by whoever pleased her most. She was not a prize to be won. She was a person making a choice in the full view of the room, because the choice was hers, and the making of it was hers, and she had decided that the most accurate statement she could make about who she was, after 4 years of the room deciding for her, was this: the standing here, the offered hand, the specific man she was offering it to. "Lord Benedict," she said. Her voice was the voice she had been finding across 6 months of anonymous letters and parliamentary debates and November study arguments. The voice that was not the social voice, not the warm hostess voice, not the performance of any of the versions of herself the Ton had been watching. The voice that was simply hers, used in the way her voice was used when she meant something completely. The rest of the world wants the Duchess. I am looking for the only man who ever saw the woman beneath the crown. Will you dance with me? The room was very quiet. Not the quiet of a room that has stopped talking. The quiet of a room that has understood something and is absorbing the understanding before it. Produces a response. Benedict looked at her hand, he looked at her face, he smiled. It was not a social smile, not the small, correct expression of a man receiving a social gesture and returning an appropriate one. It was the smile she had seen once, briefly, in the November study when she had caught him in the middle of an argument, and he had been entirely inside it, and had briefly, entirely, forgotten to be the Earl of Renmore, and had been simply the person who was in the argument. That smile, reserved, she understood now. For the moments when he forgot to be careful, which were the moments when something had his full, unguarded attention. She had his full, unguarded attention. He took her hand. He led her to the center of the floor, not with the composed, authoritative stride of the parliamentary earl, but with the specific, slightly different quality of a man who is doing something he has imagined, doing for a very long time, and who is, in the doing, giving it the full attention it has always deserved. The orchestra began. None of this was visible from the center of the floor. From the center of the floor there was the music and the movement, and the specific, particular quality of 2 people dancing who have been in correspondence for 6 months, and who are, in the dancing, conducting the correspondence by different means, the same attention, the same full and unmanaged presence, the same quality of actually being where they are, rather than performing being where they are. She had spent 4 seasons being the most wanted woman in London. She had not, in 4 seasons, been known. She was being known now, in the center of the room, in full view of everyone, by the one person who had seen her in a gallery at 19, with an expression that told him she had read the relevant precedents and had opinions about them, and who had decided, on the basis of that expression, that she was worth seeing carefully for as long as it took for her to understand what being seen carefully felt like. It felt like this. It felt like the center of a room that is arranged around you, not because you are beautiful, or because you are powerful, or because the social world has decided to organize its attention in your direction, but because you are here, and he is here, and the here that contains both of you is the most important room either of you has ever been in. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with the full, unguarded, entirely unmanaged attention of a man who has stopped being careful. She found she did not want him to start again.